I didn't cry at my husband's funeral. People noticed. I could see it in the way they glanced at me over their casserole dishes and sympathy cards. That slight pause, that small shift in their eyes. 51 years with Walter, and I stood dry-eyed at the graveside while the November wind pulled at my black coat. My daughter held my arm the entire time. She kept squeezing it, the way you squeeze something you're afraid might fall. I didn't cry because I had promised Walter I wouldn't. 3 days before he passed, when it was just the two of us in that hospital room with the humming machines and the pale afternoon light, he had taken my hand and said, "Eleanor, don't you dare make a scene." And then he smiled that crooked smile he'd had since the day I met him at a church potluck in 1971. So I didn't. I held it together the way he always said I could. What I didn't know, standing there at that graveside with my daughter's hand on my arm, was that the hardest part had nothing to do with grief. My name is Eleanor. I'm 67 years old. I live in the same house in Clover Hill, Virginia, where Walter and I raised our 2 children, where I planted the same rose bushes 3 times because the deer kept eating them, where the 3rd step on the staircase has creaked since 1989 and I never once fixed it because it meant I always knew when the kids were sneaking down for midnight snacks. That creak outlasted both of them leaving home. It outlasted Walter. It still wakes me up sometimes at night, when the house settles, and for just a second I think someone is coming down those stairs. My daughter's name is Renee. She is 43 years old, lives 40 minutes away in a newer neighborhood with her husband Craig and their 2 boys. After Walter passed, she started coming around more. Every Sunday for dinner, then twice a week, then calling every morning before I'd even had my coffee. I thought it was grief. I thought she missed her father and was holding on to me the way people hold on to what's left. I was glad for it, honestly. The house was quiet in a way I hadn't expected. Walter hadn't been loud. He was a reader, a man of careful words, but his presence had filled rooms in a way I can't fully explain. Without him, the house felt like a book with all the pages still there, but somehow the story gone. Renee's visits put sound back in the rooms. Her boys ran up and down the hallway. Craig fixed the gutter that had been pulling loose on the east side. I made pot roast on Sundays and everyone sat around the table and I told myself this was what it was supposed to look like now. It was a Tuesday in March, about 4 months after Walter's funeral, when Renee first brought it up. We were sitting at the kitchen table. I was going through some mail, mostly bills. A letter from Walter's pension office. The usual March stack of things that needed attention. Renee set a cup of coffee in front of me and sat down across the table and folded her hands the way she does when she has something prepared to say. "Mom," she said, "Craig and I have been talking." I looked up. "We think it might make sense," she said carefully, "for us to help you manage things, the finances. Just so you're not dealing with all of it alone." I looked back down at the pension letter. "I've been handling finances since before you were born," I said. "I know that." She reached across and put her hand over mine. "But Dad always did the investments, the account transfers, all of that. You said yourself you weren't sure about some of it." She wasn't wrong. Walter had managed the investment accounts. He'd always shown me the statements, walked me through the numbers, but I hadn't been the one moving things around. When he got sick, we had sat down together with our financial advisor, a careful man named Gerald who wore bow ties and spoke slowly. And Gerald had helped me understand the full picture. The house, the savings, the investment account, a small life insurance policy, not wealthy but solid. The word Walter always used was solid. "I can learn what I need to learn," I told Renee. "Gerald is helping me." "Gerald is 68 years old, Mom. He's probably retiring soon." She paused. "Craig has been handling investments for years. He's good at it. Really good." I had nothing against Craig. He was a decent man, quiet, responsible, employed steadily. He had never been unkind to me. But something about the conversation made the back of my neck feel the way it does before a storm comes. A pressure. A stillness. "Let me think about it," I said. She smiled and squeezed my hand and picked up her coffee. And I thought that was the end of it for now. It wasn't the end of it. Over the following weeks, Renee brought it up again in different ways. Once as a question about whether I understood the tax implications of withdrawing from Walter's IRA, once as a gentle observation that the investment account had dipped slightly because of market movement and someone really should be watching that. Once, simply, as worry, she sat across from me and said, "Mom, I just lie awake some nights, thinking about you here alone, trying to manage all of this." Each time, something in her voice was soft and reasonable and full of love. And each time, that pressure at the back of my neck returned. The thing about being told someone is worried about you is that it can feel exactly like being loved. It took me a long time to learn the difference. In April, Craig came to the house on a Saturday with a folder of papers. Not thick, just a few pages. "A power of attorney document for financial matters," he explained. Sitting at my kitchen table in the same chair where Walter used to sit with his reading glasses and his crossword puzzles. "Just a formality," Craig said. "Standard. So that if anything ever happened to me, a fall, a health issue, anything, they could step in without delay and make sure my affairs were handled." "You'd still be in control of everything," Craig said. He pointed to a paragraph. "See, it says right here, this only activates under specific conditions." I read the paragraph. Then I read it again. My reading glasses were on and the afternoon light was good, and I read every word on every page. "I'd like to have Gerald look at this first," I said. Craig nodded. "Of course." "Absolutely." But Renee, who had been standing by the kitchen counter, said quietly, "Mom, Gerald is not a lawyer. He's a financial advisor." "Then I'd like a lawyer to look at it," I said. There was a small silence. "That's fine," Craig said. "We just want you to be comfortable." I called my neighbor Margaret that same evening. Margaret's husband had passed 2 years before Walter, and she had navigated all of it. The estate, the accounts, the paperwork, with what I had always considered remarkable composure. She gave me the name of her attorney, a woman named Patricia Holt, who had an office downtown above the old pharmacy building. I made an appointment for the following Thursday without telling Renee. Patricia Holt was a small woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a directness I liked immediately. She read Craig's document in about 4 minutes, then set it on her desk and looked at me over her glasses. "This is a durable power of attorney," she said, "not conditional. The language that your son-in-law pointed to does suggest conditions. But this clause here," she tapped a paragraph I had read twice and still found confusing, "effectively overrides that. Once signed, this gives him broad authority over your financial accounts, not just in an emergency, broadly." I sat with that for a moment. "Would he be able to transfer funds?" I asked. "Yes," she said simply. "Without asking me?" "Technically, yes. You could contest it, but that would require legal action after the fact." I thanked her, paid her fee, and drove home on the familiar roads through Clover Hill with the windows down even though it was still cool. The dogwoods were blooming along Route 9. Walter and I used to drive that route every April just for the dogwoods. I thought about him the whole way home. I thought about what he would have said. Walter had a saying he picked up from his own father. "A man who needs your signature in a hurry is not working in your interest." He said it about car salesmen and timeshares and a cousin who once pitched him on a business venture. It applied, I thought, to daughters and sons-in-law too. I did not sign the document. I called Renee that evening and told her simply that I decided not to move forward with the power of attorney. I kept my voice even. I said I appreciated the offer and that I was managing fine with Gerald's guidance. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Mom, I'm not going to pretend I'm not hurt. I'm not trying to hurt you," I said. "I'm making a decision about my own affairs. We were trying to help, I know you were, I said, and I meant it. Or at least I meant the part of it that wanted to be true. The Sunday dinners continued. The calls continued. But something had shifted in a way I couldn't name yet, like a floorboard that isn't quite level and you don't notice until you've walked across it 100 times in one day, you just do. It was Gerald who noticed it first. He called me on a Wednesday in June, and his voice had that careful, slowed-down quality he used when he was about to say something he'd thought about for a while. He asked me if I had authorized any changes to the investment account. I said no. He said he had received a request, properly formatted with my account number and personal information, to change the authorized contact on the account, to add Craig's name. I told him I had not requested that. He said he had not made the change. He said he had called me first because something hadn't felt right about the timing. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The house was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the distance. I thought about all of it. The Sunday dinners, the calls, the document, the worry in Renee's voice, the way Craig had sat in Walter's chair and pointed to paragraphs. I thought about what Patricia Holt had said. I thought about my neighbor Margaret, who had handled everything herself, and who still had her house and her independence and her dignity at 71. I thought about Walter at that potluck, handing me a plate of deviled eggs and saying, "I'm Walter. I'm going to be very straightforward with you because life is short." I had loved him for that from the beginning. I called Patricia Holt the next morning. Over the following 6 weeks, quietly and without announcement, I made changes. Patricia helped me update every account so that no changes could be made without my direct, in-person authorization. Gerald and I moved the investment account to a new firm where Craig's name had never been mentioned. I updated my will, a process I had been putting off since Walter passed, with Patricia's help. I had always assumed I would leave everything equally between Renee and my son David, who lives in Oregon and calls every Sunday and has never once asked me about my finances. The new will reflected a different decision. I did not tell Renee any of this. What I did instead was keep showing up. Sunday dinners. The calls. Craig fixed the loose gutter again in August, and I thanked him and made lemonade. Renee's boys caught fireflies in my backyard on a warm July evening, and I watched them from the porch and genuinely felt, something close to happiness. The love was real. I want to say that clearly because I think it's important and because I think people sometimes assume a betrayal cancels out everything else. It doesn't. It just means you hold the love with different hands. I also started doing something I hadn't done in years. I called David. Not the Sunday calls we always had, but a different kind of call. The kind where you say, "I need to tell you some things." David listened without interrupting, which has always been his best quality. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Mom, do you need me to come out there?" I told him not yet. I told him I was handling it. "I know you are," he said. And unlike when Renee said things like that, when David said it, it was simply true. In September, Renee came for Sunday dinner and brought a real estate agent. She had not mentioned this in advance. The agent was a woman named Donna, very pleasant, who arrived with a leather portfolio and admired my rose bushes at the door and said she had heard so much about the house. Over pot roast and green beans, Renee talked about how the market in Clover Hill was remarkable right now, how houses in this neighborhood were selling for numbers I wouldn't believe, how it would be a shame to miss the window. I ate my pot roast. Donna talked about comparable sales. Craig talked about the equity in the house and how it could fund a very comfortable apartment in one of those senior living communities. The nice ones, the ones with the pools and the activities and the on-site care. I asked Donna if she wanted more green beans. After dinner, while Renee and Craig were doing the dishes, Donna leaned toward me at the table and said softly, "Your daughter loves you very much. She just wants to make sure you're taken care of." "I know she does," I said. I walked Donna to the door and thanked her for coming. I watched her drive away in a car with her agency's name on the side. Then I went back inside and stood in my kitchen, where the light was gold and familiar, and the third step had creaked when Renee's boys ran upstairs after dinner, and I thought about the roses Walter had helped me plant third time. The time they finally took. I didn't say anything to Renee that evening about Donna or the real estate portfolio. I kissed her goodbye at the door and told her the green beans had come out well. 3 days later, I called Patricia Holt and told her I was ready to finalize everything. The house is in a trust now, a revocable living trust, which Patricia explained means I control it completely during my lifetime. And what happens to it after my death is clearly, legally, unambiguously documented. It goes to my grandchildren, David's daughter and Renee's 2 boys equally, when they each turn 25. Not to Renee, not to Craig. It was not a decision I made in anger. I want to be clear about that too. It was a decision I made the way Walter made his best decisions. Carefully, with information, after thinking about who people had shown themselves to be. I also made another change. I started meeting with a woman from the county's Elder Services office. Her name is Brenda, and she is about 40 and has the no-nonsense warmth of someone who has seen everything and judged very little. She connected me with a support group, a group of women mostly, a few men, who had been through variations of what I was going through. Some of them much worse. One woman's son had emptied her checking account over 18 months. Another's daughter had put her in a memory care facility to get access to her home, even though the woman had been perfectly lucid. I sat in those circles and listened and sometimes spoke, and I thought, this happens to people everywhere, in every kind of family. It happened to people who did everything right. There's something both terrible and steadying about that. Sunday dinners continued through the fall. Renee has not brought Donna back. She has not mentioned the power of attorney again. I don't know if she knows what I've done, or suspects, or has decided to let it rest. I don't know what Craig has figured out. There are conversations ahead that will be hard, and I'm not foolish enough to think I've avoided all of them. But I sit on my porch in the evenings now, in a way I didn't sit here before any of this happened. I watch the dogwoods in the front yard and the rose bushes along the fence. They're doing beautifully this year. 5 years in now, finally established. And I feel something I have been trying to put the right word to for months. Not peace, exactly. Not victory. Not even closure, which is a word I've never quite believed in. What I feel is mine. This house is mine. This evening is mine. The creak on the third stair is mine. The trust document in Patricia Holt's filing cabinet. The account at the new firm. The will that says what I mean and not what someone else arranged. All of it is mine. Held in my own 2 hands, the way Walter always said a person's life ought to be held. I still don't cry easily. I come from people who kept their composure. But I'll tell you what I've learned. At 67, in this house where I planted roses 3 times and raised 2 children and loved 1 man for 51 years, the people who were most eager to take care of you are not always the ones who have your best interest at heart. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. The only way to know the difference is to pay attention, to ask the right questions, and to trust the pressure at the back of your neck when something isn't right. And never, under any circumstances, sign something you don't fully understand just because someone who loves you is sitting across the table asking you to. Walter told me that. I didn't need to learn it the hard way. But I held on to it anyway, and it held me. The roses are going to be beautiful next spring. I already know it.